In this video, we're going to take a look at tables. In order to work with tables, you kind of have to start thinking in terms of a grid. Consider using a table when you need to display information that sits well in a grid of rows and columns. You should think of the table as being similar to a spreadsheet. In other words, each rectangle is known as a cell. A row consists of a set of cells on the same line from left to right, and a column consists of a line of cells going from top to bottom. Just to get an idea of how this might be used, on the NFL's website you can see all the listings for, or the standings for all the teams and all the different conferences. These are all laid out in a grid. In other words, this is a table. It's got headers, it's got headers for each row, for each column, and then the data is placed inside of those cells. You could also look at another one that has TV listings, and again we have rows, which in this case is each station or each network, and then the columns are times, and then what is in each of those time slots. You'll also notice that some of these are individual, like here on PBS, each half hour is its own little cell, whereby CW it's all one cell, Fox has two cells, as opposed to the 6 down in PBS. And we'll talk about how to do that in this video. So this is some of the ways that tables are used inside of a web page. I might point out that in the early days there was a lot of use of tables for layout, for actually laying out the page. Now that we have CSS, that is no longer, tables are no longer used for that. That's old technology. So you will run into that from time to time, where various pages might be laid out using tables. I don't recommend it. If I was you, I'd stay totally away from that, and you want to make sure that you use tables for their intended purpose, which is to display data. In order to create a table in HTML, we need to use the table element, and then inside the table element, the table is written out row by row. Each row is contained inside of a TR element, which just merely stands for a table row. Each cell is then written inside the row element using a TD element, which stands for table data. So if you look at the code that's here, and I'm going to look at it here in Notepad++ editor, you can see that we have a table. Inside of the table we have two rows. Each row has two cells, or two table data. And if we run this, you see exactly that. Two rows, two columns. I would also like to point out at this time that from time to time you're going to run into code that is not written in the way that we're asking you to, or the book does. In other words, it's just going to be all on one line or multiple lines. There's no line returns to put things on a individual or separate line. This is relatively simple, but yet this is more complicated to read than this is, even though they both contain the exact same code. So during our course here in HTML and JavaScript, you're going to be indenting properly, as you can see in this example, and not doing something as you would see in this example here. Now you've seen the TR and the TD, but there's also a TH element that you can use in place of the TD element. And that's for cells that contain some type of heading. It could be a row heading, it could also be a column heading, but basically by using the TH instead of the TD, you get bold text that is centered, as opposed to plain text that is left aligned. So if we look at example 2, and you'll see some areas where we have replaced TDs with THs. Here in the first row, all the headings for the columns have THs. And then you'll also notice that the first cell in each row also has a TH, so that makes that bold. So basically what we're going to have here is that all three of these headers are going to be bold, and then everything in the first row, which will be quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, those will be bold as well. So you can see then when we run our sample that we have the bold and centered across the top, and we have the bold and centered across or down the first row. Now it's kind of hard to tell that these are centered because by default the width of any column is set by its widest or longest text that is contained in it. So these are all set to the width that would be whatever they need to fit the content in there. The same here. So you can't really see this being centered. However, if we go back to our code and we just do a couple simple things here, like setting the width here as an attribute, we'll set it to 150. That should be enough to give us what we want. Save that, go back to our page and refresh it. You now see that by changing the width of it, you can actually see that it is centered in there as well. You should also be aware that any cell can contain any markup that you want to put in there. The only constraint on placing that markup inside a table is that it must nest within the table cell element itself, whether it's a TD or a TH. In other words, you can't have an opening tag for an element inside a table cell and then the closing tag for that element outside of that cell, or vice versa. So just to show this, if we go back to our last sample, you may have also noticed that all the prices on the end, or all the amounts, are in bold as well. Well, those weren't done with a TH, but rather they were done, as you can see here, with the bold tag, the B tag, or B element, to make that bold. So you can use any other elements inside of the TD and TH tags to modify things as you see fit, to mark up things, if you would. The difference between doing this with a bold as opposed to the TH, yes, they're both bold, but the second one, this one, will not center it, while if the column was wide enough, the first one with the TH would be centered. The basic table elements and attributes for them. The table element is the containing element for all tables. It can carry the following attributes: all the universal attributes and the basic event attributes for scripting, which we'll talk about later. The DRI or DIR attribute is supposed to indicate the direction of text used in the table. So possible values are LTR for left to right, or RTL for right to left. Those will be used for languages such as Hebrew and Arabic. The DIR equals RTL, as an example, if you use the direction attribute with a value of RTL on the table element, the cells appear from the right first, and each consecutive cell is placed to the left of that one. So it kind of reverses the order. Odds are you're probably not going to use that very often. The TR element, as we talked about before, contains each row. Anything appearing within a single TR element should appear on the same row, which includes all the TD or TH elements as well. Every cell in a table is represented by either a TD element for cells containing table data, or a TH element for cells containing table headings. By default, the contents of TH usually display in a bold font, horizontally aligned in the center of the cell, and the content of a TD displays left aligned and not bold. The TD and TH elements can both carry the same set of attributes. the attribute applies only to the one cell carrying it. So in other words, if you want to apply something for just that one cell, then put it in the TD or TH and it'll affect only that cell. If you were to put it in a TR, then it would set it for all the cells in that row. Keep in mind also that any effects these attributes have would override settings from the table as a whole or any containing element such as a row element. In addition to the universal attributes and the basic event attributes, the TD and TH elements can also carry column span, headers, and row span, which we'll look at. TH elements can also carry the scope attribute, which we'll also take a look at. You use the column span attribute when a cell should span across more than one column. We saw that in the TV listings. The value of the attribute specifies how many columns of the table a cell spans across. So it's just a number without anything else, just how many cells. Column span equals 2, it's going to span across 2 cells. The one where this column span attribute is contained, as well as the next. This is similar to highlighting 2 cells in an Excel spreadsheet and using the merge to combine those 2 cells. The headers attribute indicates which headers correspond to that cell. The value of the attribute is a space-separated list of the header cells. In this example here, where we have headers equal income space Q1, those would be the value of the 2 IDs, the income ID and the Q1 ID. The primary purpose of this attribute is to support voice browsers for those who are visually impaired. The row span attribute specifies the number of rows of a table a cell spans across, or actually it should say a cell spans down. The value of the attribute being the number of rows the cell stretches across. In this case, the row span equals 2 would be applied to the top row, and the fact that it says 2, it would then span across the top and the next row as well. You can also use the scope attribute to indicate which cells the current header provides a label or header information for. You can use it instead of the headers attribute in basic tables, but it does not have much support at this particular time. Each table should have a caption so that visitors to your site know what the table is for. Even if the surrounding text describes the content of the table, it's good practice to give the table a formal caption using the caption element. By default, most browsers display the contents of this element centered above the table. The caption element appears directly after the opening table tag and before the first TR tag. So it shouldn't be included in any of the TRs or TDs. It's actually between the opening table and the opening TR, first opening TR. By using this caption element, then, you are directly associating the content of the table with that description. The association can also be used by screen readers and by applications that process web pages. The column span enables a table to span or stretch across more than one column. The value of the attribute is a whole number, which is the number of cells to span, so you can't use a fraction. The column span attribute might be useful in creating a timetable or schedule, which you saw with the TV schedule, where the day is divided into hours, some slots lasting 1 hour, others lasting 2 or 3 hours. So if we take a look at an example, we got a couple things to look at here. First of all, the caption. Notice where it's placed. It's a container element, so it has an opening and closing tag, again after the table element, the opening tag, and before the first opening TR tag. Then you'll also notice in here that the first row has 3 cells. The second row only has 2. The second one has a column span of 2, which takes in the second column and the third one from here. The last one only has one cell and it has a column span of 3. So it's going to include the very first cell, and then because of this column span of 3, the next 2 as well. So if we look at this in our browser, you see then in the second row, cell 2 with a column span of 2 spans across 2 cells. And then in the final row here, you can see that the column span of 3 has created one with, or a row with, one cell that spans 3 different cells, 1, 2, and 3. The other thing you should notice is that the caption is on the top here. We looked at that in our code. And one of the things the book doesn't tell you about is that we can add the align attribute to this, and it takes a value of top, bottom, right, or left. Top is the default, but maybe you want it on the bottom at some point. So you just add the align attribute, the value of bottom. If we go look at this again, refresh it, and you can see now that the caption is on the bottom. We'll also look at doing this right. It does not rotate it. It just kind of squeezes everything in there. So go back again and refresh this again. Now it's on the right side, and as you can see, it doesn't rotate it sideways or anything, but it determines on its own how wide this is going to be, and then it just uses that. And a lot of times it's done by the longest word and done from there on. So that sets the width. The row span again acts just the same as the column span, but it works in the opposite direction. Instead of horizontal, it works vertically across cells. So for the row span, we'll go back to example 4, which is very similar to the 3 that we looked at, but you'll notice now in the first row, the third cell has a row span of 3. So it's going to cover the one that's missing here and the third one that's missing here. In the second row, we have a column or a row span of 2. So it's going to start there and include one of the ones that should be here, making the third row only one cell in there. The other 2 cells, as you can see, this is 3 cells wide, 3 columns wide. The other 2 cells are made up from the row span 2 and the row span 3. So if we look at this in our browser, you see now the row span of 2, which was done in the second column, and the row span of 3, which was done in the third column. It's actually the third cell of the first row. This one, it was done with the second cell of the second row. So that takes care of part 1 of tables.